Hey everybody, I'm Laurie Ruettimann here with my dear friend, Mary Ellen Slayter, really trying to figure out the timing of LinkedIn Live, but more importantly, here to talk to you about the Shift Digital Conference and all the stuff that we love in the world of work, power, politics, and money. So here's how this is going to go today. Mary Ellen and I are going to chit chat about stuff we text over. We might talk about our conference. We might talk about George Bush or Donald Trump. Like all of this may come up. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be great. So Mary Ellen, let's start by talking about Basecamp, because you and I have been texting all week about Basecamp. And the more I read about the story, the angrier I'm getting.
Yeah, like more information is not making this better.
No.
One, I want to say this word. My business is built on Basecamp. We have been using Basecamp like we were built digital first, decentralized from the beginning, remote. I was as fully bought into like the Basecamp philosophy about remote work as any person could be without it becoming a religion. Okay. So I get that the founders, you know, they've actually always written these manifestos, right? And they're great. They're powerful pieces of writing. It's one thing when you write a manifesto about remote work and it's out for the world and it's this big idea. It's another thing when you write a manifesto and send it to your employees, which is what that felt like.
Yeah. So let's take a step back. The story at Basecamp is that there's been a lot of internal turmoil over politics and remote work and benefits and the way basically workers and management relate to one another and to the world. And instead of the CEOs really bringing in some experts to try to sort through this conversation around white supremacy and privilege and bias, they did a couple of things. They just made some decisions for their workforce and they cemented those decisions in a memo. And it's my fundamental belief that anybody who writes a memo in 2021 is part of the problem, right? I mean, that's bad. And number two, the memo was really a way to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we believe in. And the workers did a really great thing and said, that's what you believe in, leadership team. We're out of here. And they lost a third of their workforce. So Mary Ellen, I want to talk about that because you know, I believe in a work environment that's professional, where we show up and work at that intersection of purpose and meaning, and then we go home and live these amazing lives. And I was actually kind of encouraged by the fact that, you know, a third of that workforce quit in the face of a leadership team that didn't align with their values. So what do you think about all that?
So first thing, I want to back up and talk about like how they knew this conversation was happening, right? So we talk about that there's these water cooler conversations that would be happening. Typically these things would happen in passing. The CEOs of the past, founders of the past, even senior management, they might not actually know about those conversations. In fact, it became pretty easy for you to isolate yourself from it. But in some ways, the fact that they were remote and more of us are remote, the conversations themselves were happening inside Basecamp, which is what they encourage. So when you think about those Slack channels where people are sending memes or when, you know, Basecamp's got a similar function where people can discuss things. Like it's a Slack-like thing. And so they were actually focused on solving a very specific work problem and doing it in the way that they were instructed to do. That's what I found so offensive about this. Do you know, I don't know if you saw this, it was a list. Somewhere along the line, customer success there, customer management started keeping a list of people with funny names.
Yeah, I did.
And they were mostly ethnic names. And somebody said, hey, guy, and it was being shared inside this system. And people said, hey, that's not so cool. Can we stop doing that? And then they started a D&I group. And he's like, well, no more committees. It's like, basically, this guy was given the gift of transparency.
Yeah.
Into what the things that were concerning his people. And his response was to take what he learned and just say no.
Yeah, to say no, which, you know, I have to say is every CEO's prerogative, right? They can look at what's happening inside of their workforce and they can say, you know what, we hear you as a leadership team, but no. But then the marketplace steps in, employees as a marketplace, and they have a choice. They can either say, you know what, we're going to continue trying to work to change, to get our leadership to see things differently, or they can leave. And a third of them left. Like, I want to just celebrate that. Now, that's a privilege. Not everybody can leave, and not everybody can leave right away. But a fact that the third of the workforce drew a line in the sand, I think should be a wake-up call.
A 50-person company, that's like devastating.
Totally.
So, I think part of the surprise, probably not to the people inside the company because they've been battling this already. Part of the surprise would be that the founder, what is his name? Jason Fried, I believe is his name. Am I saying his last name correctly? I think it's spelled like Fried, but it's like we pronounce it Fried, I think.
Wait, he's got one of those funny names. We should put it on a list.
Right. Yeah. So Jason, his name is Jason. Okay. So Jason, to me, people expected differently because he had these sort of more progressive ideas about remote work. And I think sometimes we make assumptions that when people have progressive ideas, like I don't know why that's progressive, like it's just a system of getting work done. But they thought that he was going to be different, and that he was going to be progressive on these other things. But I personally was not that surprised because if you go back and you look at the things that they've written and you look at how he does business, they are often contrasted with Atlassian, which was started at the same time, which took outside funding, which is now a massive company, right? It has a huge product suite, it's very diverse, and actually also puts a lot into their DEI. They've had some pretty great people serving in that rotating role for the last few years. And really, they set themselves up to be the anti-Atlassian, and they've only got funding, I believe, from one outside funder, and Jeff Bezos is the only person that's put money in there. And so what I actually see when I look at these guys is they're control freaks. They're not noble. Like people were like, well, they just skewed outside funding and they went after this model. It's like it's two dudes and they don't want to listen to anybody else.
Yeah.
And that to me came loud and clear in that memo.
Isn't that the crux of most problems, though, in leadership? It becomes an insular group of people who just don't want to hear it from anybody else, and they want full control. And I think there's something to be said, again, I'm saying this for a bunch of workers saying enough is enough. And as we start to reemerge and are forced to go back to work or forced to participate in systems of work that we didn't like before the pandemic, and we're forced to do that now, I think we're going to have more and more of these conversations where workers are going to say, you know what, I'm done. This is too much. You've crossed a line in the sand, whether it's going back to long commutes or participating in a work environment that's closed and doesn't have great airflow. We're going to have more and more of these conversations where workers finally step up into that role that unions used to play and say, all right, there's nobody here to represent me, but I need to represent myself. And so in that way, I think that part of the Basecamp story is the one that stuck with me. But Mary Ellen, I wonder, you as a user now are faced with a choice, because Basecamp is never going to change truly unless they start to see customer behavior. And I will not put you on the spot, but there are pros and cons with staying with Basecamp, right? One is you can be there for the change, the pivot that should come, or you can say enough is enough. I'm going to take my business elsewhere. What are your thoughts as a user?
So the first thing is that you'll notice I didn't just, my reaction to that behavior was, I didn't just send out a memo to our team informing them that we would no longer be using Basecamp. Nope. We'll now be switching to Trello. That's the most important thing I want to note. And in fact, we have our monthly all hands meeting, and I'm going to bring that up for discussion. Like, hey guys, how do you feel about this? The thing is, like, Basecamp does get the job done for us. It's inexpensive, and like there is a point where we knew we were going to be leaving Basecamp when we needed something as more robust, even agency-specific tools that have come up.
Yeah,
I've got my eye on Workfront. Right, like Adobe's doing some cool stuff with Workfront. Trello keeps getting better and better, and the way that they've integrated into the Atlassian system means that there's also stuff you can mature with them.
That's right.
So the most important thing I want to say is that I won't be making this decision unilaterally.
What, you're not going to have a patriarchal decision that you just cast down on everybody? No. Okay.
Yeah, no, even whether it's matriarchal or not either. Like, it's just not. So we'll talk about it, right? So that's the most important thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say, and I swear this is related, is like, I think I told you, Jason to me is like my new John Mackey.
Yeah.
Which is that, again, people thought because he was selling hippy dippy food that meant that he was like Mr. Progressive. And it's like, no, he doesn't want to pay for your health insurance either. Right. And it turns out he's actually incredibly like close. It's controlling. It's not even, I'm not going to say conservative, because it's not actually entirely a political thing. It's like a need to like maintain this tight control. Although, look, in both cases, these guys do have two things in common. They both sold to Jeff Bezos.
Oh, that is interesting.
So,
Well, we can go on about the power of Amazon, the corruptive power of Amazon on another day, but I like the idea that you're going to talk to your team about the future of the organization and where, Basecamp fits in or where it doesn't. I think that's really the future of leadership.
I do still shop at Whole Foods because there are certain things, like it's not my primary grocery source, but I feel about Jason about the same way I do about John Mackey. It's like, dude, I definitely don't think that you're anybody I want to model myself about for leadership. I wish you'd stop writing these stupid op-ed / memos, like whatever you're going to call them. And occasionally I'll pop in here and buy some bell peppers.
Yeah.
Like,
all right.
That's all I got.
Well, we solved the Basecamp problem, right? I mean, we'll continue to talk about this. And again, you and I text probably 25 articles a week to one another, right? I mean, whatever we read, we're like, read this. And one of the things that I've been texting to you for the past, 3 or 4 months is this idea that I've been writing about and haven't published until this week, which is let's solve this problem with women leaving the workforce by just hiring them back. Like, I'm super passionate about this. We hire people for all sorts of random reasons, and then they come to work for us, and we don't fire them for performance. It takes an act of God. We let a bunch of stuff slide. Why don't we just hire these women back? And eventually they'll go back to being productive. But in the interim, let's lean into the well-being tools. Let's give them some grace. Let's give them some coaching. And let's give them space to just deal with what they need to deal with, like we promised to our workforce. And then when they're ready, they'll be back to work. Like, it's not going to take forever, but it's going to take some time. So I've been peddling this idea. People hate the idea of just hiring them back. So what do you think about it, Mary Ellen?
Why do you hate it so much? Like, again, we have people underperforming in roles, all of corporate America is full of them. I bet that you could probably randomly sack a third of the people in corporate America tomorrow. And there would be, in the true sense of the bullshit jobs guy, what's his name?
Oh, David Graeber. Yeah.
The world would not be harmed.
So while we keep them on the payroll, let's talk about how performance is subjective.
Keep them on the payroll so they can feed their kids, right? And so that they can come back in and do other things. So I actually agree with you. I think this idea that this is not the time to enforce accountability. This is not the time, like all the stuff we've talked about this too. It's like people would rather all these wellness programs, and all these things that are supposed to help people, be more resilient and, whatever. It's like, how about you just pay people and let them go home on time and get a whole night's sleep?
Yeah, that's the number one performance improvement plan right there.
Anything to keep from paying people and giving them control over their work.
Well, and isn't that it, Mary Ellen? It's all about not paying people. It's all about really continuing this path of paying successful executives at a higher level than the workforce. And if you can somehow differentiate between that, you can continue to justify a CEO and executive making 300 times the annual salary of an average worker. So when I hear that, we couldn't just hire these women back, because how could we expect them to perform? They still have all the challenges that drove them out of the workplace. Or when I hear it's not a company's responsibility to take care of these women, I just want to scream, because again, we make excuses for poorly performing workers throughout our organizations all over the place. I think it's time to hire women back and actually not assume that they would poorly perform because they've been out of the workforce taking care of their kids.
There's no reason to think that. And the truth is, we could probably let them cut their hours to limited hours and just say, look, here's what we need you to do. Just get it done, make the weekly call. If you're good, right? There's parameters for that. You can give people, I find that if you tell people what their remit is, if you tell them what their mission is, and you tell them, here are the resources that you get to accomplish it and get out of their way, a lot of people will actually perform better.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I do also think I want to go back to something you talked about, the people just leaving these bad jobs, and whenever they draw that line in the sand. Every time you were describing that, I was thinking about that talent swap. All those women that they got kicked out of the workforce, when they do come back. So if you don't just hire them back, where do they think they're going?
Yeah,
they're going to their your competitors.
That's right.
And you're okay with that, right? It's and I think there's about to be a whole lot of that. People who, I was having a conversation with somebody, they said, oh, well, their sister, their office was calling everybody back to work. And I was like, well, I hope she's looking, but she's got young kids. And she's like, I hope she's looking for another job.
Yeah, she is.
Smart, because there are going to be plenty of other companies who are not asking that.
Totally.
So
I don't envy the human resources professional who is a worker herself, and most likely a woman, who has to enforce some of these return to work initiatives. I mean, how can you do that with a straight face? How can you say, I believe in people and I believe in autonomy and I believe in giving individuals a birth to be, self-directional and to work in the best ways for them and to do great work, and yet have to implement some of these return to work programs? I mean, it's a cognitive nightmare, right? There's cognitive dissonance there, knowing that you're doing good for the organization, but you're being a detriment to the worker. I mean, it's just such a compromise of HR's principles and values that I think we're going to see a talent swap within HR and people just saying enough is enough. So stay tuned for that talent swap discussion. Yeah. All right, my friend, anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up and talk about shift?
I want to talk to you a little bit, because you talk about this in the book. You talk about those people walking, and you talk about the privilege of being able to walk.
Yeah.
What are some things that people can do to make sure that they have a little bit of that privilege? Like, what are some life decisions that you make? Because you talk a lot about this, like with money, and like, talk to me about how you put yourself in that position when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, it is a privilege to just up and quit. That's why very few people do it. But just because you decide today to quit doesn't mean you have to quit today. You can quit in small ways. You can quit working 60 hours a week and work 40. You could quit caring about office politics. You can quit being involved in all the stuff that drains your energy and just really show up in a sense of professional detachment and treat people like they're your best favorite clients, and then go home and live a really great life. But you can also set yourself up for success financially. You can stop competing in the workforce. You know how many people invested their own money in building these amazing Zoom backgrounds for a job that won't make them rich? They just felt like they didn't want to show their home to their colleagues until they spruced it up and spent thousands of dollars improving a work environment that they're now forced to abandon because their CEO is friends with the guy who runs the commercial real estate division and wants to get back into the office, right? So what I'm saying is stop spending money on work, and you can start to set yourself up financially to give you that FU fund to quit a little sooner, to give yourself the financial freedom to feel like you can make some decisions and go do a job that's more closely aligned with your values. So yeah, I write about that extensively in the book because I did it for myself. I realized I didn't want to work in HR, but I didn't quit right away. I had to build that life in order to quit. So there are a lot of things you can do. You can negotiate severance. It's all in the book. And I don't mean to talk about the book, but this is something I preach on my website, in my blog. This is something you and I talk about. And this ethos of self-leadership, which is what this really is at the heart of our conference, of our virtual summit. So maybe tell everybody a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we created Shift because we felt like, of all the conversations around the future of work that were happening, like none of them felt very empowering to us, right? It either was all about, if it was directed to HR, it was like, here's how we're going to replace you with a robot, right? And you better get used to it. And then the other half of it was to workers, was like, yeah, we're definitely replacing you with a robot. And it's all like gloom and doom, and like, I felt like what we actually are in front of, it could be bad, right? Like we have a choice in creating this future, like the future of work, and it could be bad and it could be good. And this partly depends on the values that we bring into it. So Laurie and I wanted to bring our values into this event and then use that as a way to equip people with the skills that they need to do just what those Basecamp employees did. So have people talking about negotiation. We have Lindsay Pollock's coming on to talk about her new book, Recalculating. It's like how we've had to pivot so fast. But negotiation skills, like what does it mean to negotiate, in a digital environment? Like how do you advocate for yourself, whether individually or united with other people? I am more supportive of unions, I think, generally than Laurie is, but
I like the union just fine, but I like myself better.
You're always like, oh, we've replaced like what I was like, no, we're bringing it back.
You know, I will say, as we're not having a union discussion now, but I always believe that you represent your own interests the best. And so I don't trust any system of power. That's where I am on the political spectrum, but I would take a union over an HR department any
Right.
day.
Yeah, no, we should have our own, we should have a union discussion, because I think good unions and bad unions, because like there are so many bad unions, like I'm not going to argue with that, but the face of unions has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you take on this idea of more of a guild, you know, more of an art behind all of this. I love all of that. So anyway, we're going to have all of these discussions at Shift. It's a free event for you to really improve your career, but more importantly, to take control of your life and to make some good decisions going forward. As the economy opens up, you should have the opportunity to learn, grow, and work at that intersection of purpose and meaning. So the website is shiftdigitalcareers.com. And Mary Ellen, why don't you take us out?
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. That's what we do. Bye.